Hey gang, it's your mate Platt back with another episode of Value Spirits, and today we have one I'm really looking forward to. It's one of my personal favorite bourbons out there, and it is Maker's Mark. I purchased this bottle at $27.99. You're going to find this around the $30 point. Hopefully you can find it a little under, but somewhere around $30 in most market. A little background into Maker's. Maker's was founded in 1953 by a gentleman named Bill Samuel Sr. He purchased the Birch Distillery in Loretta, Kentucky for the astronomical price of $35,000. I could say an investment well worth it. He began production the next year in 1954, and 4 years later he had some bourbon ready to bottle. In 1958 they started bottling, and right away they had the red wax. That is something they've always done. Now, where the idea for the red wax came from, and also the family symbol which is up top of the bottle, was from Bill's wife, Marjorie. She supposedly was into pewter, or working with pewter at the time, and do a little research. A couple hundred years ago, 200-300 years ago, one of the ways to kind of make documents a little more official, or any kind of personal correspondence from your family, whatever, was a drop of wax in the family. You would take pewter and make your family little symbol and push it in the wax. So let's say King whatever sent the letter to the Duke or whatever, you would see that family symbol pushed into the wax. So she came up with that. Something real neat, hopefully to kind of help make their product a little more unique, kind of stand out. Now, what makes Maker's Mark stand out is actually what's in the bottle, more specifically what's in the grain bill. Maker's Mark is a bourbon, which by law has to be 51% corn, but they allow 3 other grains to be utilized: rye, barley, and wheat. Older bourbons are traditionally bourbons were more, the secondary grain was traditionally rye. Older bourbons like a Jim Beam type or whatever will have, more of a rye flavor to it. Barley was also generally utilized, but in smaller amounts, because of the enzymes inside are real efficient at breaking down starches into sugars. So distillers would throw in some barley to help rye and corn convert their starches into sugars, but not necessarily for a flavor component. Wheat has always been kind of the little stepbrother in the whole process, but Bill changed that. His mash bill for Makers is 70% corn, 16% winter wheat, and 14% barley. No rye at all. For those of you that drink rye, you know that rye has like a peppery bite, it's fairly aggressive. It is not necessarily for new bourbon drinkers or people kind of new to whiskey, kind of get thrown off by that. So Bill just eliminated the rye, and that's why a lot of people find Maker's more approachable. Now, how did he get to this idea? He basically, instead of doing test batches, which could be a long time, expensive, whatever, he took his various grain bills that he was playing with, crushed the grains, and made bread with them. And he found that the bread without any rye kind of did better in their testing, their friends and family. Also, too, he worked anew with a gentleman named Pappy Van Winkle. That's right, there was really a Pappy Van Winkle, whose distillery was producing W.O. Weller's and Old Fitzgerald's, which are also known for their wheat component in their mash bill. So he apparently had this idea, but finally perfected it with that mash bill. In 2013, they ran into a little controversy. They were going to drop the proof. Maker's is bottled at 90 proof. The plan at the time was to drop it to 84 proof. They said that, hey, you will not notice a flavor difference, but we are pretty tight on inventory. Demand's high. We just can't keep up. That will give us more inventory flexibility. Well, they got pushback, kind of like New Coke, and so they scrapped the plans, and you still get 90 proof Maker's Mark today. With one exception, Australia, apparently the product shipped there is only 80 proof. Over the years, the company's changed hands several times. In 1980, Hiram Walker purchased the company. A few years later, they got rolled into Allied Domecq in 1987. And then in 2005, they became part of the Pernod Ricard line of spirits. Finally, they ended up at Fortune Brands in 2011. Now, Fortune Brands today is what we know as Beam Suntory. Fortune Brands became Beam and Beam Suntory. So this is in the same corporate portfolio as your Jim Beam products. Totally different mash bill, though, for sure. Real quick, let's talk about some of the other Maker's products out there. They are starting to expand the line now. For years it was just Makers and that was it. The first edition was Makers 46, comes in at 94 proof. Basically what they wanted to do with Makers 46 is they didn't want to stray too far off Makers and what made Makers, the bourbon it is. What they ended up doing was they figured out a way to alternate barrel staves from the traditional new white oak American staves, and they ended up adding some French oak staves that has just a slightly different kind of flavor profile also to the grain, or it's a tighter grain, so it ages at a different rate. And whatever the 46th variation was they were playing with, that's what the flavor profile is, and then what they hit. Next we have Makers Cellar Aged Bourbon, 115 proof. This is a blend of 11 and 12-year-old bourbons. Between that proof point and the age of the spirits, this is something that's allocated. It's not necessarily something you're going to find on your shelves all the time. Also, too, you're probably going to pay a pretty nice price. I looked around at the time of the shooting. I saw the price of $600-700. I don't know what MSRP is for this, but I got a feeling you're going to pay a nice little premium if you can find it. Lastly, Makers 101, 101 proof. It's everything that you like at Makers at 90 proof, just a little more intense. We're not watering it down as much, so if you like the vanilla that you pick up here, it's going to be a little more intense. If you like the oak, it's going to be more intense. So. And they're expanding more. I think they've gotten into batch strength, stuff like that. So, well, that being said, though, enough talk. Let's drink some Maker's Mark. All right. Oh, that's a beautiful nose. Just that nice vanilla, burnt wood sugar notes in there. Reminds me a lot of those rick houses. If you've ever been to a bourbon distillery or wherever and walked through where they keep the barrels, man, it just reminds you of that. All right, enough of this. Let's dive in. OMG, I haven't had this in a while, but this just tickles me. Doesn't drink, if you're just used to 80 proof, even when you jump up to 90 whatever, you catch a big difference, or you'll notice it. I don't notice the heat, even though it is there. It's obviously going to be warming, but it's not hot, it's not aggressive. Of course, you get that classic corn sweetness up front. It expands in your mouth, not aggressively, but the flavor will expand. It's got a nice medium finish. It doesn't sit around forever. And again, out of the grains there, rye's probably the one that's going to linger the most anyway. So your barley, whatever, and the corn tend to be a little shorter as far as finishes goes, but got a nice little bit of viscosity, not huge, not thick, but enough there. But man, this is just a nice, good, easy drinking bourbon. Luckily at the price point, you want to throw in a cocktail, and at 90 proof, it's got enough oomph in there that, if you went with your traditional old-fashioned or Manhattans, it's got enough to push through that sweetness, but it also plays well with the sweetness too. It's not fighting it like, if you went with the rye in those drinks. But, man, just what a nice, well-executed bourbon. Again, if you're wanting to try bourbons but have always been a little cautious, or maybe you drink, some Wild Turkey or Jim Beam when you're in college and that's bourbon in your mind, give this a try for sure. Just wonderfully nice, sweet, soft bourbon that's still 90 proof. It's bourbon, it's there. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or spirits you'd like me to try, please leave them in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.